I stood frozen in that sterile law office as attorney Sarah Patterson read the words that shattered my world completely. My parents had left my 25-year-old brother Marcus a $2.5 million mansion in Miami, while I received only a dilapidated cabin in remote Alaska. My fiancé Derek immediately turned to me with disgust written across his face. "You're a pathetic loser, Hollie," he spat venomously. "I'm done with this joke of a relationship. Marcus actually has a future worth investing in." Standing there in my black funeral dress, watching the man I planned to marry abandon me for money, I realized my entire existence had crumbled in one devastating moment. 3 days later, I couldn't contain my anguish any longer. I drove to my childhood home in Bellevue, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I rehearsed the confrontation I'd been avoiding. The Tudor-style house looked exactly as it always had, but somehow everything felt different now. Cold, unwelcoming. My mother Linda answered the door wearing her usual pristine cardigan, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early morning hour. She didn't invite me in. "We need to talk about the inheritance," I said, pushing past her into the foyer where family photos lined the walls. Photos where Marcus always stood in the center while I lingered at the edges. "There's nothing to discuss, Hollie." My father Robert emerged from his study, his reading glasses perched on his nose, as if I'd interrupted something far more important than his daughter's devastation. "The will was executed exactly as your mother and I intended. How could you do this to me?" The words came out as a broken whisper. "I'm 28 years old. I've worked my entire life to make you proud. I became an environmental scientist, graduated summa cum laude, never caused you a moment of trouble. And you give everything to Marcus, who's never held a job for more than 3 months." My mother's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Darling, men need more financial security to start families properly. You chose a career over traditional values. We simply can't reward that kind of selfish behavior." "Selfish?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I dedicated my life to protecting the environment, to making the world better for future generations. How is that selfish?" My father adjusted his glasses with clinical precision. "You prioritized your own ambitions over family obligations. Marcus understands that family wealth should remain with those who appreciate traditional roles. You made your choice when you decided to play scientist instead of focusing on marriage and children." The cruelty in his voice cut deeper than any physical wound. These were the people who had raised me, who I'd believed loved me unconditionally. But their words revealed a truth I'd been blind to for decades. As if summoned by my misery, Derek's voice echoed from the kitchen. My heart lurched as he appeared in the doorway, his arm casually draped around Marcus's shoulders like they were old friends, which apparently they were. "Oh, good you're here," Derek said with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Saves me the trouble of calling." "What are you doing in my parents' house?" I demanded, though deep down I already knew the answer would destroy me further. Marcus grinned, his boyish features twisted with malicious satisfaction. "Derek and I have been getting to know each other better since the will reading. Turns out we have a lot in common, like our opinion of gold-digging women who think they deserve handouts." "Gold digging!" I laughed hysterically. "I never asked for anything from anyone. I worked 2 jobs to pay for college while you partied your way through 3 different universities that Mom and Dad financed. The difference is I'm not pretending to be something I'm not," Marcus replied smugly. "Derek here finally sees the truth about your character. Don't you, buddy?" Derek stepped forward, his blue eyes cold as winter ice. "I'll admit, Hollie, you had me fooled for a while. All that talk about wanting a simple life, claiming you didn't care about money, but I always knew you were banking on that inheritance. When I realized your parents had more sense than to reward your rebellious streak, well," he shrugged callously, "a man has to think about his future. You proposed to me 6 months ago." I whispered, feeling like I might collapse from the weight of his betrayal. "You said you loved me." "I love the idea of you," he corrected cruelly. the version where you came with a substantial trust fund and learned to be a proper wife instead of playing in the dirt like a child. My best friend Jennifer had tried to warn me about Derek's obsession with my family's wealth, but I'd defended him passionately. Now her concerns seemed painfully prophetic. Actually, Marcus said, his grin widening, I should probably mention that Derek and I have been talking for months about this whole situation. I may have given him some insight into the will's contents well before the reading. The room spun around me as the full scope of their conspiracy became clear. You both knew how the inheritance would be divided, and you planned this whole thing. Planning is a strong word, Derek said with mock thoughtfulness. Let's call it preparation. I needed to know where I stood before making any long-term commitments. Marcus was kind enough to share some family insights. Family insights. I turned to my brother with growing horror. You told him about the will before our parents even died. Marcus shrugged with infuriating nonchalance. Dad and I discussed their estate planning months ago. They wanted to make sure I understood my responsibilities as the primary heir. Derek happened to ask some very reasonable questions about your financial prospects when he was considering proposing. You sabotaged my relationship before it even had a chance. I breathed, feeling the walls of the house closing in around me. You orchestrated this entire betrayal. I simply provided information, Marcus said innocently. Derek made his own choices based on facts. Can you really blame a man for wanting financial stability with his future wife? My mother nodded approvingly. Derek is a sensible young man who understands the importance of marrying within appropriate economic circumstances. It's unfortunate you couldn't appreciate his practical considerations. The casual way she dismissed 2 years of my life, my engagement, my trust, made something snap inside me. These people had conspired to humiliate me to steal not just my inheritance, but my future husband, and they felt completely justified in their cruelty. You're all sick, I said quietly, backing toward the front door. I don't know who you people are, but you're not my family. A real family doesn't plot against each other like this. Don't be dramatic, dear, my father called after me. This is simply how the adult world functions. Perhaps that broken-down cabin will teach you some valuable lessons about reality. I stopped at the threshold, turning back to face the 4 people who had just systematically destroyed my life. You know what the most pathetic part is? I actually feel sorry for all of you. You think money and manipulation equal success, but you've just lost the only person in this family who actually gave a damn about anyone but herself. Marcus laughed harshly. Right, St. Hollie strikes again. Have fun playing pioneer woman in the wilderness. Maybe the isolation will help you develop some perspective on your own shortcomings. I slammed the door behind me and walked to my car through a haze of tears and rage. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer asking how I was doing, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I explain that my entire family had orchestrated my destruction with surgical precision? As I drove away from the house where I'd grown up, I realized with crystal clarity that I had absolutely nowhere to go. My lease in Seattle was ending next week. My savings were minimal thanks to years of student loans, and the man I'd planned to build a future with had been plotting against me for months. The only thing I owned in the entire world was a broken cabin in Alaska that my parents had given me as a final insult. A cabin I'd never seen in a place I'd never been, thousands of miles from everything familiar. But as I sat at a red light watching my childhood disappear in the rearview mirror, a strange sense of determination began to replace the despair. Maybe that cabin would be my refuge from the people who had betrayed me. Maybe Alaska would offer me the fresh start I desperately needed. One way or another, I was about to find out. 2 weeks later, I found myself cramped in the passenger seat of a rattling twin-engine Cessna, staring down at the endless wilderness of Kodiak Island through scratched plexiglass windows. The commercial flight to Anchorage had been uncomfortable enough, but this final leg of my journey felt like voluntarily jumping into an abyss. Captain Roy Stevens, the bush pilot I'd hired for the flight, looked exactly like central casting would order for an Alaskan aviator. His weathered face bore the deep lines of someone who'd spent decades battling fierce winds and unpredictable weather. His flannel shirt had seen better years, and his baseball cap advertised a fishing lodge that had probably closed before I was born. "You sure about this, miss?" he shouted over the engine noise for the third time since takeoff. "That cabin you're heading to hasn't had regular visitors in over 15 years. Most folks who inherit property out here take one look and sell it to developers." "I don't have anywhere else to go," I replied honestly, watching the green expanse below us stretch endlessly toward distant mountains. Besides, how bad could it really be? Roy's expression suggested it could be considerably worse than I was prepared for, but he'd stopped arguing after I'd paid him in cash up front. The flight from Anchorage had cost $800, nearly depleting my remaining savings, but I'd burned every bridge behind me. There was no path except forward. "There she is," Roy announced, banking the plane toward a small clearing near the shoreline. "Your new home, sweet home." My heart sank as I caught my first glimpse of the inheritance that had cost me everything I'd ever known. The cabin wasn't just neglected, it looked actively hostile to human habitation. The metal roof had several gaping holes that rain and snow had clearly exploited for years. Windows were either broken or boarded up with weathered plywood. What remained of the front porch sagged dangerously, and the entire structure leaned slightly to one side like it was considering surrender. "Jesus," I whispered, pressing my face to the window for a better view of my new reality. "Language could be stronger," Roy agreed grimly. "Good news is there's a well that still works and the foundation looks solid enough. Bad news is pretty much everything else." He landed the plane on a gravel strip that looked barely long enough for takeoff, let alone landing. My legs shook as I climbed out, partly from the flight and partly from the overwhelming realization of what I'd committed myself to. "I left some basic supplies last time I flew out here," Roy said, unloading my 2 suitcases and backpack from the cargo compartment. "Previous caretaker asked me to drop off food and batteries whenever I could. Haven't seen hide nor hair of him in months, though." "Caretaker?" I asked, suddenly alert. "Someone's been living here." "Not living exactly, just checking on the place periodically. Fellow named JM left notes and payment for supply runs, but always managed to avoid being here when I arrived. Probably some old hermit who didn't want company." He handed me a business card with his contact information. "Radio in the cabin should work if you need emergency pickup. I can get here within a few hours unless the weather turns nasty. First month of winter storms usually hits in October, so you've got maybe 6 weeks to decide if you're staying long-term." As his plane disappeared into the cloudy sky, I stood alone in the Alaskan wilderness with nothing but the wind through pine trees for company. The silence was so complete it felt oppressive, broken only by waves lapping against the nearby shoreline and the occasional cry of seabirds overhead. I dragged my belongings to the cabin's front door, which hung open on corroded hinges. The interior was somehow worse than the exterior had suggested. Animal droppings covered the floor, and years of rain had warped the wooden walls until they barely met at the corners. The smell of mold and decay made my eyes water. But as I ventured further inside, I discovered signs of the mysterious caretaker Roy had mentioned. A stack of canned goods sat neatly arranged on a makeshift shelf, along with batteries, matches, and basic medical supplies. Someone had recently swept out the worst debris and even left a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner with a note attached. "Emergency shelter prepared for property owner." The note read in careful handwriting, "Water pump behind cabin works. Generator in shed needs fuel. Radio frequency 74.3 for emergencies. Stay warm. JM." The kindness of this unknown person brought tears to my eyes. After weeks of cruelty from my own family, a stranger's thoughtfulness felt like a miracle. I clutched the note to my chest and allowed myself to cry for the first time since leaving Seattle. Night fell with startling suddenness, plunging the cabin into complete darkness except for the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. I managed to get the generator running long enough to charge my devices and heat a can of soup over the ancient gas stove, but every shadow seemed to harbor potential dangers. The walls creaked continuously in the wind, and strange scratching sounds came from somewhere above my head. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by what sounded like heavy footsteps circling the cabin. My heart hammered as I lay perfectly still in the sleeping bag, straining to identify the source of the noise. Bears, I thought frantically. Roy had mentioned bears during the flight, along with warnings about proper food storage and making noise when walking through dense brush. The footsteps stopped directly outside the front door. I held my breath, waiting for whatever was out there to lose interest and move on. Instead, I heard what sounded distinctly like someone trying the door handle. Panic flooded my system as I realized the door had no working lock, just a rusty latch that wouldn't stop a determined child, let alone a wild animal or potential intruder. I searched frantically for something to defend myself with, settling on a heavy flashlight that felt woefully inadequate against any real threat. The door creaked open slowly, and I bit back a scream as a dark figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the starlit sky. But instead of entering, the figure seemed to hesitate, then carefully closed the door again before disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, clutching the flashlight and jumping at every sound the old cabin made as it settled around me. By dawn, I was exhausted and questioning every decision that had led me to this desolate place. But as sunlight streamed through the broken windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I felt something unexpected determination. My family had written me off as weak and impractical, incapable of surviving without their support. Marcus had called me a failure who would never amount to anything meaningful. Derek had dismissed me as a naive dreamer who couldn't handle the real world. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was completely out of my depth in this wilderness. But I was done running from challenges, done accepting other people's definitions of my worth. This cabin might be a wreck, but it was mine. And I was going to make it work no matter what obstacles stood in my way. I spent the morning exploring the property more thoroughly, discovering that the damage was extensive, but not necessarily irreparable. The well did indeed work, producing clean water when I primed the hand pump. The generator ran smoothly once I figured out its quirks. Most importantly, the basic structure of the cabin seemed sound beneath all the superficial decay. As I was examining the floor near the far wall looking for signs of rot damage, one of the loose boards shifted under my weight. When I knelt to press it back into place, it moved again this time, revealing a dark gap underneath. My heart raced as I pried up the board, completely exposing what appeared to be a hidden opening leading into some kind of basement or cellar. Cool air drifted up from the darkness below, carrying a strange warmth that seemed impossible given the building's condition. I grabbed my flashlight and peered into the opening, seeing rough wooden steps descending into blackness. This definitely wasn't mentioned in any of the property documents I'd received from the attorney. In fact, I was certain the cabin's plans showed no basement at all. Somewhere in the darkness below, I could hear the steady drip of water and what sounded like electrical humming, as if some kind of machinery was operating down there, which made absolutely no sense, given that the cabin barely had functional electricity on the main level. I sat back on my heels, staring into the mysterious opening. After everything I'd been through, the last thing I needed was more secrets and surprises. But curiosity won out over caution, and I realized I had to know what was hidden beneath my inheritance. Whatever lay in that basement might finally provide some answers about why my parents had really left me this seemingly worthless property. And after the devastating betrayals I'd endured, I was ready for some truth, no matter how strange it might be. I descended the wooden steps, carefully testing each one before putting my full weight on it. The air grew warmer as I went deeper, and the electrical humming became more pronounced. My flashlight beam revealed smooth concrete walls that looked far more modern than the ramshackle cabin above. At the bottom of the stairs, I gasped in amazement. The basement wasn't a basement at all. It was a fully equipped underground facility that stretched much further than the cabin's footprint should have allowed. Banks of computer monitors lined one wall, most of them displaying scrolling data and geological maps. Scientific equipment I recognized from my university days filled metal tables, including spectrometers, sample analyzers, and surveying instruments worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "What in the world?" I whispered, running my flashlight beam across the sophisticated setup. The computers were running on some kind of independent power system, explaining the humming I'd heard. As I moved closer to examine the monitors, I noticed they were displaying real-time seismic data mineral composition analyses and detailed topographical maps of the surrounding area. A thick folder labeled Kodiak Island Geological Survey Confidential sat next to the main computer terminal. I opened it with trembling hands, revealing page after page of technical documentation that made my environmental science training feel elementary by comparison. The surveys dated back 20 years and bore the signature of Dr. James Morrison, a name that made my blood run cold. James Morrison had been my grandfather's name. My grandfather, who had supposedly died 15 years ago in a climbing accident in the Cascade Mountains. I flipped through the documents, frantically finding detailed mineral analyses, core sample data, and projection reports that painted an incredible picture. According to these surveys, the property I'd inherited sat on top of one of the largest rare earth mineral deposits ever discovered in North America. The estimated value of extractable materials exceeded $100 million. "This can't be real," I muttered, but the evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of pages of documentation, photographic evidence of mineral samples, and professional geological assessments all pointed to the same conclusion: I wasn't the owner of a worthless cabin. I was sitting on a fortune that made my brother's inheritance look like pocket change. A video camera sat next to the computer terminal connected to a large monitor. When I accidentally bumped the mouse, the screen came to life, revealing a folder full of video files organized by date. The most recent entry was labeled "For Hollie, March 2023, and dated just 3 months ago. My hands shook as I clicked on the file. The screen filled with the image of a man I thought I'd never see again. My grandfather, Dr. James Morrison, looking older and more weathered than I remembered, but very much alive. "Hollie, my dear girl." His familiar voice came through the speakers. "If you're watching this, then my plan has finally worked. You've inherited the cabin and discovered my research facility. I knew you would. You were always the curious one in the family, the only one who inherited my love of scientific discovery." I sank into the chair in front of the monitor, tears streaming down my face as my supposedly dead grandfather continued speaking. "I'm sure you have a million questions, and I promise I'll answer them all. But first you need to understand why I've been hiding down here for 15 years, letting everyone believe I was dead." He gestured to the equipment around him. 20 years ago, I discovered something extraordinary beneath this property, rare earth minerals in concentrations that defied everything geologists thought they knew about North American deposits. The find was so significant it could have revolutionized American manufacturing and reduced our dependence on foreign mineral imports. His expression darkened. But when I tried to publish my findings, I was approached by representatives from Blackstone Mining Corporation. They made it very clear that my discovery would be acquired one way or another. When I refused their initial buyout offer, things got dangerous very quickly. The video showed my grandfather pulling up photographs of what appeared to be surveillance equipment around the original family property in Seattle. "They bugged our house, followed your grandmother, even threatened your father's job. When they realized I wouldn't cooperate, they arranged what they thought would be a fatal climbing accident." I gasped, remembering the tragic news that had devastated our family, but my grandfather was smiling grimly in the video. "Fortunately, I've been climbing these mountains since before you were born. I saw their sabotage attempt coming and managed to fake my own death convincingly enough to get them off my back. I've been living in a secondary facility deeper in the mountains ever since continuing my research and waiting for the right time to reveal the truth. He leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense. I chose you to inherit this property, Hollie, because you're the only one in our family with the scientific background to understand what we're dealing with. More importantly, you're the only one with the integrity to handle this responsibly. My mind reeled as the implications sank in. My parents hadn't given me the cabin as an insult, they'd given it to me because my grandfather had specifically requested it. But that meant they knew about the mineral wealth, which made their behavior even more confusing. The video continued with my grandfather explaining the technical details of his discovery. The rare earth deposits included neodymium dysprosium and terbium elements, essential for renewable energy technology, electric vehicles, and advanced electronics. The property could supply American manufacturers for decades while creating thousands of jobs. But here's where things get complicated. My grandfather said, his voice taking on a warning tone. Blackstone Mining has never stopped watching our family. They've been waiting for an opportunity to seize control of this property through legal manipulation, and I have reason to believe they've placed someone close to you. The screen showed a photograph that made my stomach drop. Derek, my ex-fiancé, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside a building marked Blackstone Mining Corporation. Derek Matthews has been feeding information to Blackstone for over 2 years, my grandfather explained. His relationship with you was orchestrated to gain access to family inheritance details. They needed to ensure the property ended up with someone they could manipulate or eliminate. I felt sick as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Derek hadn't just been using me for money, he'd been actively working to steal my family's heritage for a corporation that had already tried to murder my grandfather. I have GPS coordinates that will lead you to my current location, my grandfather continued, but you must come alone and you must be certain you're not being followed. Blackstone has been monitoring all electronic communications related to our family. They know you've inherited the property and they're planning to move soon. The video ended with coordinates appearing on screen and a final message: trust no one except the person you find at these coordinates. Your life may depend on it. I love you, granddaughter. Welcome to the family business. I sat in stunned silence trying to process everything I'd learned. My grandfather was alive. The worthless cabin I'd inherited was actually sitting on a fortune. My ex-fiancé was a corporate spy, and somewhere in these mountains, a mining corporation was planning to steal everything I'd just discovered. But underneath the shock and fear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. My family's betrayal hadn't been just cruel. It had been orchestrated by people who wanted to exploit their ignorance and my perceived weakness. They'd given me this property because they truly believed it was worthless, never suspecting that doing so would reunite me with the grandfather I'd mourned for 15 years. I memorized the GPS coordinates and began planning my journey into the mountains. Whatever dangers lay ahead, I was done being a victim. It was time to fight back against the people who had tried to destroy my life, and I wouldn't be facing them alone. My grandfather was out there waiting for me, and together we were going to make sure justice was finally served. The hike to my grandfather's coordinates took me through some of the most challenging terrain I'd ever encountered. Armed with a GPS device from his research facility and a backpack stuffed with supplies, I followed animal trails and creek beds deeper into the Kodiak Island wilderness than any tourist had probably ever ventured. After 6 hours of climbing over fallen logs, wading through ice-cold streams, and navigating around massive boulders, I began to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. The GPS showed I was close to the coordinates, but I saw no signs of human habitation anywhere in the dense forest of Sitka spruce and mountain hemlock. Then I noticed something that didn't belong: a solar panel barely visible through the tree canopy, camouflaged so well I almost missed it completely. Following the nearly invisible cable leading from the panel, I discovered a trail so subtle it looked like a natural deer path. The trail wound upward along a ridgeline before terminating at what appeared to be a solid rock face. But as I approached, I realized the rocks concealed a cleverly hidden entrance built into the mountainside itself. Grandfather. I called softly, feeling ridiculous but not knowing what else to do. Hollie. The voice came from behind me, and I spun around to find Dr. James Morrison emerging from the forest like a ghost materializing from the shadows. At 78 years old, he looked like a mountain man from a wilderness survival show, lean, weathered, with a full white beard and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. Grandpa. I threw my arms around him, sobbing with relief and joy and disbelief all at once. He felt solid and real and wonderfully familiar, despite the 15 years that had passed since I'd last seen him. My brilliant granddaughter, he murmured, holding me tight. I knew you'd figure out the clues and find me. You always were too smart for your own good. He led me through the hidden entrance into an underground facility that made the cabin's basement look primitive by comparison. This was a fully self-sufficient research station carved directly into the mountain, complete with living quarters, a workshop, communications equipment, and banks of computers displaying data from sensors placed throughout the surrounding area. Welcome to my home for the past 15 years, he said with a sweep of his arm. Not exactly the retirement I'd planned, but it served its purpose. We sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee that tasted like the best thing I'd ever consumed while he explained the full scope of what I'd stumbled into. The mineral deposits under your property are just the beginning, he said, pulling out detailed geological surveys that covered hundreds of square miles. This entire region is sitting on mineral wealth that could transform the American economy. But Blackstone Mining Corporation has been systematically acquiring land rights throughout Alaska, using corruption, intimidation, and worse, to steal what belongs to individual families and the American people. He showed me photographs and documents that painted a picture of corporate conspiracy spanning decades. Blackstone had been bribing local officials, manipulating environmental impact studies, and even arranging accidents for people who stood in their way. They approached your parents 5 years ago with an offer to buy the cabin property, he continued. When Robert and Linda refused, Blackstone shifted to a longer-term strategy. They planted Derek in Seattle with instructions to get close to our family and gather intelligence about inheritance plans. I felt nauseated as the scope of Derek's deception became clear. He dated me for 2 years just to spy on us. Derek Matthews isn't even his real name, my grandfather said grimly. His actual name is David Kane, and he's the nephew of Blackstone's CEO, Richard Kane. He's been working for the family business since college, specializing in what they call relationship intelligence gathering. The betrayal cut even deeper than I'd imagined. Every moment of our relationship, every intimate conversation, every plan we'd made for the future, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to extract information I didn't even know I possessed. But here's where Blackstone made a critical mistake. My grandfather continued, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. They assumed your parents knew about the mineral deposits when they structured their estate planning. They had Derek encourage the inheritance division that would leave you with the supposedly worthless cabin, thinking it would be easier to manipulate or eliminate one isolated young woman than deal with your entire family. My parents really didn't know, I asked, thinking back to their cruel words about my unworthiness. Robert and Linda had no idea what this property was actually worth, he confirmed. I never told them about my discoveries because I knew they couldn't be trusted to keep quiet. Your father always valued money over family, and your mother, well, she's always been easily influenced by anyone who promised her social advancement. His expression softened with sadness. They genuinely believe they gave you the cabin because it was worthless and you deserved nothing better. The irony is beautiful in a tragic way. What about Marcus? I asked, dreading the answer. Marcus has been in contact with Blackstone for months, my grandfather said. They approached him after Derek reported on your family dynamics. They convinced him that cooperating with their plans would result in a substantial finder's fee once they acquired the property. So my brother's betrayal had been motivated by simple greed, just as I'd suspected. But Derek's manipulation went far deeper than I'd realized. The most disturbing part, my grandfather continued, is what they're planning next. According to my surveillance of their communications, Blackstone intends to have both you and me killed within the next few days. They've already sent a security team to Alaska with orders to eliminate any obstacles to their property acquisition. My blood ran cold. They're going to murder us. They've done it before, he said matter-of-factly. Environmental activists in Montana, tribal leaders in North Dakota, even a federal inspector who asked too many questions about their mining permits. Blackstone has a well-documented history of making problems disappear permanently. But instead of seeming frightened, my grandfather looked almost eager, which is why we're going to turn the tables on them completely. I've been preparing for this confrontation for 15 years, gathering evidence of every illegal thing they've done. It's time to bring them down. He led me to a wall covered with surveillance photos, financial documents, and recorded communications that painted a comprehensive picture of Blackstone's criminal enterprise. The evidence was overwhelming enough to put dozens of executives in federal prison for the rest of their lives. The FBI has a task force dedicated to corporate environmental crimes, he explained. I've been feeding information to Agent Maria Santos for 3 years, building an airtight case against Blackstone. But we needed them to make one final, undeniable mistake that would expose their entire operation. What kind of mistake? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. They need to attempt to seize your property illegally, preferably while threatening violence against witnesses, he said with a predatory smile, which they're planning to do tomorrow morning according to the communications I intercepted. Tomorrow. I felt panic rising in my chest. Don't worry, he assured me. Marcus is flying in tonight with a Blackstone security team. Derek will be with them along with Richard Kane himself. They're planning to present you with a fake legal document claiming mineral rights ownership and demand you sign over the property immediately. And if I refuse, they'll threaten you with violence, probably roughing you up to demonstrate they're serious. Standard intimidation tactics they've used successfully dozens of times before. My grandfather pulled out a sophisticated recording device and a tiny camera. Except this time, everything will be documented and live-streamed directly to Agent Santos and the FBI's Alaska field office. When they threaten you tomorrow, they'll be confessing to conspiracy, attempted theft, and probably attempted murder in real time. You want to use me as bait, I realized? I want to give you the chance to destroy the people who tried to destroy you, he corrected. Derek Marcus, your parents, Richard Kane, all of them will face justice for their crimes, but only if you're willing to take the risk. I thought about everything these people had done to me. The years of lies, the orchestrated betrayals, the systematic destruction of my trust and self-worth. They'd tried to leave me with nothing, assuming I was too weak and naive to fight back. It was time to prove them wrong. What do you need me to do? I asked. My grandfather smiled with fierce pride. I need you to go back to that cabin and wait for them to make the biggest mistake of their lives. I returned to the cabin just as the sun was setting my backpack, now equipped with hidden cameras and recording devices that my grandfather had spent years perfecting. The technology was so sophisticated it looked military grade, which he'd explained was because some of it actually was military grade acquired through his contacts in the intelligence community who'd been investigating Blackstone's activities. The cabin looked exactly as I'd left it, but everything felt different now that I understood its true significance. This wasn't just a broken-down shack my parents had given me out of spite. It was the key to exposing one of the largest corporate conspiracy cases in American history. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, arriving tonight with lawyers to discuss property transfer. Be ready to sign documents in the morning. No greeting, no concern for my well-being after weeks of isolation. Just business. I spent the evening setting up the surveillance equipment according to my grandfather's detailed instructions. Tiny cameras went in strategic locations throughout the cabin, positioned to capture both video and audio from multiple angles. A live stream transmitter would send everything directly to Agent Santos in real time, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. Around midnight, I heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching. Through the cabin's cracked windows, I watched a sleek black aircraft land in the clearing where Roy's bush plane had touched down weeks earlier. 4 men climbed out their expensive clothing and confident postures, marking them as people accustomed to getting their way through intimidation and money. I recognized Derek immediately, even in the darkness. Marcus walked beside him, gesturing animatedly as they approached the cabin. The other 2 men wore suits that probably cost more than my annual salary and moved with the precise coordination of professional security personnel. "Hollie," Marcus called out cheerfully as they reached the front door. "Hope you're decent in there. We've got some important business to discuss." I opened the door wearing my most convincing expression of confused innocence. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" And Derek, I thought we were... "Change of plans, sweetheart," Derek said with the kind of condescending smile that had once made my heart flutter, but now made my skin crawl. "We've discovered some irregularities with your property inheritance that need immediate attention." The older of the 2 suited men stepped forward with practiced authority. "Miss Morrison, I'm Richard Kane, CEO of Blackstone Mining Corporation. This is my associate, Mr. Vincent Torres, our legal counsel. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding mineral rights on your property." Mineral rights, I asked, channeling every acting skill I'd ever possessed. "I don't understand. This is just an old cabin." Marcus laughed with the same cruel satisfaction I'd witnessed at our parents' house. "That's what we thought too, Hollie. But it turns out dear old Grandpa James left us more than just sentimental memories." Richard Kane opened a leather briefcase and removed a stack of official-looking documents. "Miss Morrison, our geological surveys have determined that this property contains valuable mineral deposits that were never properly registered with local authorities. According to territorial mining laws, these rights revert to the first corporation capable of proving commercial viability." "I don't understand any of this," I said, which was partly true. The legal language was deliberately complex and intimidating. "It's simple," Derek said, moving closer with the kind of predatory confidence that now made my stomach turn. "You're going to sign these documents transferring mineral rights to Blackstone Mining Corporation. In exchange, we'll provide you with a very generous settlement that should keep you comfortable for years." Vincent Torres pulled out a check already made out in my name. $50,000, Miss Morrison. More money than you've probably ever seen at once." I stared at the check, letting them see the temptation in my eyes. $50,000 for mineral rights worth over $100 million. The offer was so insultingly low it was almost funny. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked quietly. Richard Kane's expression hardened slightly. "Well, that would be unfortunate for everyone involved. You see, Miss Morrison Blackstone Mining Corporation has significant resources at our disposal. We've dealt with uncooperative property owners before, and we always find ways to resolve disputes to our satisfaction." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, making my voice tremble slightly. "We're offering you a generous settlement for property rights you didn't even know you owned," Marcus said impatiently. "Take the money, Hollie. It's more than you deserve anyway." Derek reached out to touch my arm, and I had to fight every instinct not to recoil. "Hollie, sweetie, you're not equipped to handle something this complicated. Let the professionals take care of business while you focus on rebuilding your life somewhere more suitable." "Like where?" I asked. "Somewhere far from Alaska," Richard Kane said with sinister emphasis. "This is dangerous country for people who don't understand how things work up here." The threat was becoming clearer, but I needed them to be more explicit for the cameras. "What do you mean, dangerous?" Vincent Torres smiled coldly. "Accidents happen in the wilderness, Miss Morrison. People get lost, fall into ravines, encounter aggressive wildlife. It's tragic, really. but completely unavoidable for city folks who venture into places they don't belong. "You're scaring me," I said honestly. "Good," Marcus said with casual cruelty. "Maybe fear will help you make smarter decisions than you usually do." Derek pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photographs that made my blood run cold. They were surveillance images of me hiking to my grandfather's location taken from multiple angles with professional equipment. "We know you've been exploring the area, Hollie," Derek said. "We also know you found something you weren't supposed to find. Our security team is very thorough about monitoring potential security risks." "Security risks?" I asked, letting genuine alarm creep into my voice. Richard Kane stepped closer, his presence deliberately intimidating. "Miss Morrison, you've stumbled into a situation far beyond your understanding. Blackstone Mining Corporation has invested millions of dollars and several years developing extraction rights in this region. We will not allow one naive young woman to interfere with projects that will benefit thousands of American workers." "But this is my property," I protested weakly. "Property ownership doesn't include mineral rights when those rights were obtained through fraudulent means." Vincent Torres said, his legal training evident in his smooth lies. "Your grandfather's original surveys contain significant errors that invalidate any claims he might have filed." "My grandfather died 15 years ago," I said, watching their reactions carefully. Marcus and Derek exchanged glances that confirmed they knew otherwise. Dead or alive. Marcus said James Morrison's claims to these mineral deposits are legally worthless. "Sign the papers, Hollie, before this gets uglier than it needs to be." "And if I refuse?" I asked again. Richard Kane's facade of professional courtesy finally slipped completely. "Then you'll join your grandfather in whatever hole he's been hiding in for the past 15 years. Do you really think we haven't known where he's been this entire time?" The confession was exactly what my grandfather and Agent Santos needed to hear. Blackstone Mining Corporation had just admitted to knowing about my grandfather's fake death and implied they were planning to murder both of us. "You know he's alive," I whispered. "We know a lot of things, Miss Morrison," Vincent Torres said with professional menace. "We know about his ridiculous research facility. We know about your little hiking expedition yesterday. We know he's been feeding information to federal investigators thinking he's building some kind of case against our company." Derek laughed harshly. "Did you really think a couple of tree huggers could outsmart one of the largest mining corporations in North America? We've been 3 steps ahead of you since the day you inherited this worthless cabin." "Which brings us to the final offer," Richard Kane said, pulling out a pen and placing it on the table next to the documents. "Sign these papers right now, take your $50,000, and disappear forever. Or refuse and become another tragic wilderness accident that nobody will ever solve." I stared at the pen, letting them think I was genuinely terrified and considering their demands. In reality, I was calculating how much more evidence we needed to guarantee their convictions. "What guarantee do I have that you'll let me leave alive even if I do sign?" I asked. "You don't," Marcus said with breathtaking callousness, "but cooperation definitely improves your chances of seeing tomorrow." Perfect. They'd just confessed to planning my murder regardless of whether I cooperated, all while being recorded by devices they had no idea existed. I picked up the pen with trembling fingers, letting them believe they'd finally broken my resistance. "Where do I sign?" But before I could put pen to paper, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air again. This time, multiple aircraft were approaching, and their searchlights were already illuminating the cabin clearing. Richard Kane cursed as the realization hit him. "Federal agents," he breathed. "How did they—" "Because my granddaughter is a lot smarter than any of you gave her credit for," came my grandfather's voice from the cabin's back door, followed immediately by Agent Maria Santos and a team of FBI tactical officers. "FBI, nobody move." Agent Santos shouted, her weapon drawn and trained on the Blackstone executives. Richard Kane, Vincent Torres, Derek Matthews, and Marcus Thompson, you're all under arrest for conspiracy, attempted extortion, threats of violence, and multiple violations of federal mining law. As the agents handcuffed the 4 men who'd tried to destroy my life, I finally allowed myself to smile. Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than I'd imagined it would be. The arrest of Richard Kane and his associates should have been the end of the story, but as Agent Santos explained while processing the evidence we'd gathered, Blackstone Mining Corporation's criminal enterprise ran much deeper than even my grandfather had suspected. We've been building this case for 3 years, Agent Santos said as we sat in the cabin reviewing the recorded confessions. But Kane and Torres are just middle management. The real power behind Blackstone's illegal operations comes from a network of corrupt officials, foreign investors, and political connections that reaches into the highest levels of state and federal government. My grandfather nodded grimly, which is why they felt so confident threatening us directly. They believed their political protection would prevent any meaningful prosecution. What does that mean for us? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. It means this isn't over, Agent Santos replied. Kane's arrest will send shockwaves through their organization, but it will also make them desperate. Desperate people make dangerous decisions. She was proved right within hours. As the FBI team was preparing to transport their prisoners back to Anchorage, we received intelligence that a larger Blackstone security team was already en route to Alaska with orders to clean up what their executives couldn't finish. How large? My grandfather asked, his expression growing serious. 12 operatives, military training, full tactical equipment, Agent Santos reported. They're not coming to negotiate or threaten. They're coming to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence. I felt cold fear grip my stomach. Can't you stop them? We will, Agent Santos assured me. But we need to make sure they commit crimes on American soil before we can act. Right now, they haven't broken any laws we can prove in court. My grandfather was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical maps Agent Santos had spread across the cabin's table. Finally, he looked up with the kind of expression I remembered from my childhood when he was solving particularly challenging scientific problems. What if we gave them exactly what they want? He asked. Meaning, Agent Santos prompted, they're coming to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses, my grandfather explained. What if we made them think they'd succeeded while actually documenting everything they do? Over the next several hours, we developed a plan that was both brilliant and terrifying. Using my grandfather's knowledge of the local terrain and Agent Santos's law enforcement expertise, we created an elaborate trap that would lure Blackstone's security team into committing multiple federal crimes while being recorded by hidden surveillance equipment. The plan required me to play dead convincingly enough to fool professional killers, then remain hidden while they destroyed what they believed was evidence of their conspiracy. If everything went perfectly, we'd have irrefutable proof of their criminal intent. If anything went wrong, I'd actually be dead. You don't have to do this, my grandfather said as we finalized the preparations. Agent Santos has enough evidence from tonight's recordings to put Kane and Torres away for decades. We could walk away right now and let the FBI handle the rest through traditional investigation. No, I said firmly. These people tried to steal everything from me. They manipulated my family, destroyed my relationship, and planned to murder both of us. I want to see their entire organization brought down. As dawn approached, we put our plan into motion. I took a position in the hidden basement beneath the cabin, surrounded by surveillance equipment and emergency communication devices, while my grandfather and Agent Santos retreated to his mountain facility to coordinate the federal response. The Blackstone security team arrived at exactly 8 in the morning, approaching the cabin with military precision. Through hidden cameras, I watched 12 armed operatives surround the building and begin their systematic search. Their leader, a man with sergeant stripes tattooed on his forearm, spoke into a radio headset as his team confirmed the cabin was empty. Target location secured. No sign of primary subjects. Initiating evidence destruction protocol. What followed was methodical and chilling. The operatives used specialized equipment to search for recording devices, computers, and documents that might implicate their organization. They found and destroyed several obvious surveillance cameras, but missed the sophisticated military-grade equipment my grandfather had concealed throughout the structure. Basement located one operative reported through his headset. Significant electronic equipment present. Recommend complete destruction. I held my breath as heavy footsteps descended the wooden stairs just 20 feet from my hiding position behind a false wall my grandfather had constructed for exactly this purpose. Through a tiny periscope, I watched the operatives place explosive charges throughout the research facility that had taken my grandfather 20 years to build. But their systematic destruction was also their downfall. Every explosive they placed, every piece of equipment they destroyed, every communication they made was being recorded by devices they couldn't detect. More importantly, their radio communications were being monitored by Agent Santos and her team, providing real-time intelligence about their criminal activities. Charges set, I'm the team leader reported. Facility will be completely destroyed in 10 minutes. Any evidence of mineral deposits or corporate connection will be eliminated. What about the Morrison woman and her grandfather? Came a voice through the radio that I recognized with shock as Derek's. No sign of either target, the leader replied. Probably fled when they realized we were coming. Find them, Derek's voice ordered with cold determination. They're the only witnesses who can connect our organization to tonight's events. This operation isn't complete until they're both dead. The confession was exactly what we needed. Derek had just ordered my murder over an open radio channel being monitored by federal agents, providing irrefutable evidence of conspiracy to commit violence. But the plan took an unexpected turn when the team leader received new orders through his headset. Change of mission parameters, he announced to his team. Intelligence suggests targets are hiding in secondary facility approximately 2 miles northeast. We're moving out to eliminate them before extraction. My heart stopped as I realized they were heading directly toward my grandfather's mountain facility, where Agent Santos and her team were waiting. But they weren't expecting a direct assault by 12 heavily armed military contractors. I activated my emergency communication device and whispered into the microphone, "Grandpa, they're coming to you. 12 operatives, full tactical gear orders to kill on sight." His response was immediate and calm. "Copy that. Agent Santos is ready for them. Stay hidden until this is over." Through the periscope, I watched the Blackstone team disappear into the forest, leaving behind enough explosives to level the entire cabin. But instead of feeling trapped, I felt empowered. These people had underestimated me one final time, assuming I was too frightened and helpless to pose any real threat to their operation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I listened to radio chatter as Agent Santos's FBI team engaged the Blackstone operatives in the mountains, documenting their crimes while protecting innocent civilians. The tactical communications painted a picture of professional law enforcement officers systematically dismantling a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for decades. Finally, Agent Santos's voice came through my communication device. "All clear, Hollie. 12 suspects in custody, charges including attempted murder, destruction of federal evidence, and conspiracy to commit violence against federal witnesses. You can come out now." I emerged from the basement to find my grandfather waiting in the cabin, clearing his face, showing relief and pride in equal measure. "You did it, granddaughter. You brought down the entire Blackstone network." "We did it," I corrected, hugging him tightly. "All of us together." Agent Santos approached with a tablet showing the preliminary evidence they'd gathered. "With tonight's recordings and the confessions we've documented, we have enough evidence to prosecute not just the operatives and executives, but the corrupt officials who enabled their crimes. This case is going to reshape how we handle corporate environmental crimes." As federal agents processed the scene and arrested the last of the Blackstone conspirators, I realized that my inheritance had given me something far more valuable than money. It had given me the power to fight injustice and win to stand up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. My family had tried to leave me with nothing, believing I was too weak and naive to survive on my own. Instead, they'd given me everything I needed to become stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. The war was over, and justice had finally won. 6 months later, I stood in the observation deck of the Morrison Environmental Research Foundation, watching the sunset paint the Alaskan mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The cabin that had once been a symbol of my family's betrayal now served as the headquarters for one of the most innovative environmental research facilities in North America. The transformation had been remarkable. Using the $100 million in mineral wealth my grandfather and I had legally secured, we'd built a world-class research center dedicated to sustainable resource extraction and environmental protection. The foundation employed over 200 people from local community members to internationally renowned scientists, all working together to prove that economic development and environmental stewardship could coexist. The legal aftermath of the Blackstone conspiracy had exceeded even Agent Santos's expectations. Richard Kane received 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy attempted murder and violation of dozens of environmental protection laws. Vincent Torres got 15 years for his role in the legal manipulation scheme. Derek, whose real name turned out to be David Kane, received 8 years for fraud and conspiracy, though his cooperation with investigators had reduced what could have been a much longer sentence. Marcus had surprised everyone, including me, with his genuine remorse once he understood the full scope of what he'd gotten involved in. His cooperation with federal prosecutors had resulted in probation and community service, but more importantly, it had opened the door to rebuilding our relationship on honest foundations. "I was jealous of you for years," he'd admitted during one of our weekly video calls. "You were everything Mom and Dad wanted me to be: smart, driven, principled. When Blackstone offered me money to provide information about the family, it felt like finally getting recognition for something. I never imagined they were planning to hurt you." His transformation seemed genuine. He'd enrolled in business school and was working part-time for a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families affected by corporate environmental crimes. Our conversations were tentative, but increasingly warm, built on mutual respect rather than childhood resentment. My parents had faced the most difficult reckoning of all: the revelation that they'd unknowingly given me property worth over $100 million while keeping Marcus's inheritance for themselves had forced them to confront their own biases and prejudices. The media attention surrounding the Blackstone case had made their favoritism toward Marcus a matter of public record, subjecting them to criticism from friends, neighbors, and colleagues. "We failed you," my mother had written in a letter I'd received just last week. "We let our own insecurities and outdated beliefs blind us to your strengths and accomplishments. We don't expect forgiveness, but we want you to know that we're proud of what you've built and ashamed of how we treated you." Forgiveness would take time, but I was open to the possibility. People could change when forced to confront the consequences of their actions, and my parents seemed genuinely committed to examining their mistakes. The foundation had become everything I dreamed of during my years as an environmental science student. We were developing new techniques for extracting rare earth minerals, with minimal environmental impact, creating jobs for local communities while preserving the pristine wilderness that made Alaska so special. Our research had already influenced federal policy on sustainable mining practices and attracted partnerships with universities around the world. But perhaps the most meaningful change in my life wasn't professional, it was personal. Dr. Nathan Cross had joined the foundation 3 months earlier as our head of geological research, bringing expertise in sustainable extraction techniques and a passion for environmental protection that matched my own. Unlike Derek's calculated charm, Nathan's interest in me felt genuine and uncomplicated. He respected my work, challenged my ideas, and supported my vision without trying to control or manipulate me. Our relationship was growing naturally from friendship into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than financial calculations. "Penny, for your thoughts," Nathan asked, joining me on the observation deck with 2 cups of coffee. "Just reflecting on how much has changed since I first arrived here." I said, accepting the warm mug gratefully. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. My family had betrayed me. My fiancé had abandoned me, and I was alone in the wilderness with nothing but a broken-down cabin. And now you're running a $100 million research foundation that's changing how America thinks about environmental protection, Nathan pointed out with a smile. Not bad for 6 months' work. I laughed, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in longer than I could remember. The funny thing is, I'm grateful it all happened the way it did. If Derek hadn't betrayed me, if my parents had been fair with the inheritance, if Marcus hadn't cooperated with Blackstone, I never would have found my grandfather, never would have discovered the mineral deposits, never would have had the opportunity to build something this meaningful. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best opportunities, Nathan agreed. Though I suspect you would have found a way to make a difference regardless. You're not the kind of person who accepts injustice quietly. He was right about that. The experience had taught me that I was stronger and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. When everything I'd thought I could depend on had been stripped away, I discovered reserves of courage and determination I hadn't known I possessed. My grandfather approached from the research lab, his white beard now neatly trimmed and his eyes bright with the satisfaction of work he was passionate about. At 79, he was busier than most people half his age, dividing his time between hands-on research and mentoring the next generation of environmental scientists. "The latest core samples are fascinating," he announced, pulling up data on a tablet. "The mineral concentrations 3 miles northwest are even higher than our original projections. We could be looking at sustainable extraction opportunities for the next 50 years. What's the environmental impact assessment looking like?" I asked, reviewing the data with him. "Minimal if we use the new extraction techniques Nathan's team has been developing," my grandfather replied. "We could extract enough rare earth minerals to supply American manufacturing while actually improving the local ecosystem through careful land management." It was exactly the kind of win-win solution I'd dreamed of, creating economic development that enhanced rather than destroyed the natural environment. "I have some news to share," I said, gathering my courage for an announcement I'd been planning for weeks. "I've been invited to testify before Congress about sustainable mining practices. The House Committee on Natural Resources wants to use our foundation as a model for federal policy reform." Nathan and my grandfather both broke into grins. "Hollie, that's incredible," Nathan exclaimed. "Your work here could influence environmental policy for generations." "It's not just my work," I corrected. "It's all of ours. This foundation exists because people believed in the possibility of doing business differently, of proving that profit and environmental protection aren't mutually exclusive." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal and heartbreak that had once seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of something far more meaningful than anything I could have planned. My parents had tried to leave me with nothing, believing I was too weak and impractical to succeed on my own. Instead, they'd given me the opportunity to discover my own strength and build something that would outlast all of us. Derek had tried to manipulate me for corporate gain, but his betrayal had led me to a partnership based on genuine respect and shared values. Marcus had cooperated with people who wanted to destroy me, but his mistake had ultimately brought our family back together on healthier foundations. The Morrison Environmental Research Foundation would be my lasting legacy, proof that even the most devastating betrayals could be transformed into opportunities for growth and positive change. We were showing the world that environmental protection and economic development could work together, that sustainable practices could be both profitable and principled. But more than that, we were demonstrating that justice was possible, even against powerful opponents who seemed untouchable. The Blackstone conspiracy had been dismantled through persistence, courage, and the power of truth. Corporate criminals were serving prison sentences. Corrupt officials had been removed from office. Families affected by environmental crimes were receiving compensation and support. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was building something so meaningful and successful that your enemy's attempts to destroy you became the foundation for your greatest achievements. As we walked back toward the research facility, I felt profound gratitude for the path that had led me here. I'd lost a family that never truly valued me and gained a grandfather I'd thought was dead forever. I'd escaped a relationship built on lies and found the possibility of love based on truth and mutual respect. I'd inherited what seemed like a worthless cabin and discovered a fortune that enabled me to make a real difference in the world. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was capable of far more than I'd ever believed. When faced with impossible odds and systematic betrayal, I'd found the strength to fight back and win. That knowledge would stay with me forever, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The foundation was thriving, my relationships were healing, and justice had been served. But beyond all of that, I discovered something invaluable, the power to turn betrayal into triumph, loss into opportunity, and despair into hope. That was a kind of wealth that no one could ever steal from me again. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that initially devastated you, but ultimately led to something better? Sometimes our worst moments become the foundation for our greatest achievements. Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've transformed difficult experiences into positive change. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setbacks can become comebacks. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, your greatest strength often emerges from your most challenging moments.